Watchtower.
Well, in the meantime, the state of U.S.-Russian relations in focus, arguably hitting a new low in recent weeks. The State Department pushing back against claims from Moscow that communications between the two countries are frozen. As CBS News reports that Russia was behind an attack on a power grid in Ukraine's capital. The Wall Street Journal, in the meantime, is reporting that the hack against the DNC was similar to the one in Ukraine. President Obama has promised the U.S. will retaliate for the DNC cyber attack, although it's unclear if that will happen before he leaves office. Let's bring in Naveed Jamali, Reserve Intelligence Officer with the Office of Naval Intelligence, Senior Fellow in the Program on National Security at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Naveed, it's great to have you back on the program. What's happening here? Russia's saying, no, we can't even talk. And the United States is saying, yes, of course we're talking. What do you make of this?
Well, Jenna, it seems confusing. On the flip side, it's important to understand that, we essentially have a president who's less than 30 days out of office. I think that the ability for any president to actually do anything meaningful right now is probably pretty slim. We're seeing a war of words. Clearly, President Obama has called Russia out for being involved in something they believe to be true. And I think that, this is nothing more than a war of words, and there's probably going to be a bit of a reset when President Trump takes office. You
wrote the book, How to Catch a Russian Spy. We like to mention that because you worked covertly to roll up some Russians, bad Russians in New York City for a lot. I mean, there's a summary of your book, Naveed, but that's one of the reasons why we talk to you about these issues. And so I wonder, when you talk about a reset, what do you think the new administration needs to do so that's a positive reset for the country?
Yeah, look, I think the first thing is we have to understand that Russia, and this isn't a political thing, Russia is going to do what's in Russia's best interest. And frankly, I dealt with the Russians for years undercover. They've wanted to return to sort of the glory days of the Soviet Union. They want to reemerge on the world stage as a world power. And frankly, what they see in the United States is sort of a roadblock in them being able to do that. So their motives are very much aligned in terms of minimizing the United States so they can achieve those goals. And I think you understand that. You also understand that the Russians do not want to go to war with us, but you have to understand that their national interests are to kind of reemerge. And I think if you understand that, you can perhaps negotiate with them in that vein. But it's important to understand that they're not completely aligned with us.
So do you agree with the State Department's moves of saying, no, don't listen to the Russians. We're totally talking to them all the time? Because when you look at both stories on the surface, one of the questions I'm debating with is who actually looks stronger? Is it Russia saying, no, the communications is closed? Or is it us saying, no, they're open?
Jenna, it is disturbing. I mean, you just have to look at what's happening in Syria with the fact that it's Russia, Syria, and Iran having talks about what to do in Syria and not us. I have to say, I think we're kind of coming off of this sort of weak, and that's not a great position to be in. When you negotiate with these people, you always want to negotiate from a position of strength, and frankly, I don't see us doing that right now.
So let's talk a little bit about the hacking as well, because this is something that we're looking at closely. What did the Russians do in Ukraine? Is it something they could do here? What is your greatest fear, Naveed, when you hear about our president talking about retaliation, but also seeing what the Russians have done to other countries in the past?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And, I think I just want to start off with a caveat that, again, I worked for the FBI against the Russians. I saw firsthand the Russians. I mean, I lived it in terms of recruiting spies. And it's not an easy task. And, I've heard some crazy theories about the Trump team, the Trump transition team. To assume that the Russians are somehow recruited people in the Trump, it's preposterous. I mean, I was a nobody. The amount of effort that the Russians had to use just to talk to me was not insignificant. So I just want to get that out of the way. The second thing, in terms of hacking, it's important to define what we mean here. No one is claiming, and there's no evidence, that the Russians tampered with a numerical vote count of our elections. That's a huge thing. Secondly, when it comes to hacking, what you're seeing is sort of two silos. The Ukraine power grid, that's an offensive, action, whereas stealing information, that's just straight espionage. When it comes to cyber, the thing about cyber, remember, is that it's not like a bullet or a bomb. Once you use that weapon, it's a one and done. You can't reuse it because it's sort of like having a virus software. You can build a defense to it. So the Russians are going to be pretty careful about using that, and only in a place where it's going to be tactically advantageous to them. I don't think they're going to come after us. That would be really close to an act of war. But we're going to see more things like this sort of information warfare campaign going back to Snowden that they've used.
And just quickly about the retaliation part from President Obama, we don't really know. Did that happen? Has it happened? Are we retaliating in any way? What's important or notable there, Naveed, when you're watching what we learn from this point on.
Absolutely. And you know, Jen, I think one of the biggest things when it comes to intelligence operations, obviously you don't want to get caught. But if you do, you want to have non-attribution, which means the person who detects this doesn't know where the attack or the espionage originated from. By the president calling out Russia, essentially what he's communicating to the Russians is saying, hey, we know who was involved in this, we know where they sat, we know what computers they used, we know what their order of battle, we know who their commanding officer is. I mean, you're essentially saying that the operation that the Russians used is burned. So those resources can't be reused. So to the public, that might seem like a small slight, but in reality, to the Russians, they're going to have to look at this and say, my goodness, you know, all these offensive weapons that we've used are essentially burned. We got to go back to the drawing board and figure out what we can and can't use going forward.
Interesting take for us. We haven't heard that before, Naveed. It's something for us all to consider. Thank you so much. Great having you on the program.
Likewise.